Cool. Right. I'm gonna get started. There is a Q&A function, which hopefully some people can obviously access. If anyone has any questions, they want to kind of drop them in there. I'll come back to them at the end and try and answer any queries that anyone's got. So just to introduce myself a little bit, um, my name is Tom Gamblin, and the talk that I'm going to be doing today is about uh, bringing AI into design and digital experience, and kind of giving a bit of an insight into how at Evident we have started to make it a bit more of a kind of predominant part of our process as designers. So just to give a bit of background into Evident, Evident is a product design innovation studio off and in Cornwall. And our primary goal is to shape products and services which enable better design. So, building processes and methodologies around trying to really improve and hopefully produce a better benchmark for design in product design. And alongside that is to create captivating experiences. So we do build and design quite big systems. We do focus quite heavily in what we deem as being the enterprise space, and by enterprise I mean sort of products that have multiple functions. So they might have multiple departments, or there might be multiple users or personas that have to be involved in the product. And a little bit about me. So I'm a director at Evident. I'm 12 years in deep in design, in product design, and I tend to specialize in sort of digital transformation for enterprise. So designing quite big partners of ours, clients, quite big, large companies, I would say. So that and this talk itself is sort of been a bit of a work in progress, an ongoing iterative thing for me, because the as we've been extremely lucky at Evident to be able to work with some partners where we've had a really quite wide exposure to AI, machine learning, and these kind of really emerging technologies. So it's been I like to try and keep this talk sort of somewhat updated and current. So hopefully there's things in here which obviously will be a bit more recent, which I'll go through in a minute. Just to give a bit of a kind of I guess like a window into Evident, and kind of some of our theories of how we work. So at Evident, we really try to move towards what we call a percentage, which is basically data. So for us, the kind of holy grail when it comes to product design is the data that we want to be kind of working with. And we always look at percentages in the sense that if we can get to a point where we can understand a percentage, then we know that we have at least a set of data that we're able to actually make decisions on, as opposed to assumptions. So one of our key methodologies is that we use data over assumptions. And I'm sure everyone is somewhat aware of how important that is nowadays, and especially working on somewhat bigger products. We are a bit more kind of exposed to quite big data sets, and being able to move towards that data being the driving force is obviously a really important thing for us, and it's one thing that we try to ingrain in every project that we work on. So today, I guess what to expect. I'm a designer by trade, so I'm not going to be going into real technicalities around AI. And I'll probably, if there are any engineers sitting on this stream, it's probably going to drive you mad, because I probably won't go too deep into the real technicalities of each individual type of AI. And I'll probably be using AI as kind of a bit of an umbrella term for machine learning and deep learning and things like that. But we'll cover that stuff later. So the first thing I want to talk about is what is AI, and then I'm going to talk about the opportunity of AI and adapting for better experiences. So obviously, which I'm trying to get to a point where we can, as designers and engineers, we can see the real value of what this thing might bring, and to then show some examples of where it has been used and how hopefully to somewhat inspire concepts and ideas for designers and engineers so that they can actually take this forward and take that away from this talk today. And the last thing is how it actually impacts us as designers. I think that one of the biggest fears around AI, or the term AI, is the kind of the vast different elements that it could possibly bring. And we've dug it quite deep into potentially how this new technology might actually be able to better our process. And kind of also redefine where we sit as within our kind of role within the process. So to start, what is AI? The best thing to probably me to start what it isn't, or what I won't be talking about today necessarily. So things like chatbots and things like that isn't really what I'm going to be talking about today. Obviously, the tendency is that there are multiple different products and multiple different levels of AI. As I mentioned, I'm using AI as a bit of an umbrella term, but I won't be talking necessarily in detail around the actual, specifically things like chatbots or robots today. Two things that seem to have come out of the last time that I spoke about this was the fact that there's such a huge leap between what AI means to some people and what it means to other people. So those are two things that I'm not necessarily going to be going into. Just I'm going to try and keep it quite product based, hopefully quite understandable for designers and engineers. So what it is, and this was quite a nice. I say nice. It was quite a simple explanation of what AI is. From Accenture, which is artificial intelligence, is a collection of advanced technologies that allow machines to sense, comprehend, act, and learn. And those four things at the end, the sense, comprehend, act, and learn, I think were the real key things that I took away, and I really started to grasp when we started to work with our partners on how potentially we could bring different elements of AI or machine learning into product design and the process itself. So, I've broken it down to even simpler formats, really, in terms of just my understanding of it. So, at a real high level, this is the way I like to try and look at it: is that data equals insight, machine learning equals predictions, and artificial intelligence equals actions. So that to me is like a very simplistic way of approaching it, and that is really how I kind of started to be able to get an understanding of how this thing might work, and also start to be able to involve it in my own kind of conceptual process when we were working in kind of product design. So real talk on design. I put this slide in mainly because I think that it's a bit of an elephant in the room that I don't think a lot of designers and engineers like to talk about, and that is that we love to make assumptions when it comes to our jobs, our roles, and the projects we work in. And I think it's a natural element. We're always looking to try and improve things. I think designers love to put their stamp on a potential solution, and I think that the tendency for us is that we try to look at every project as potentially a set of problems that we're trying to solve, as opposed to kind of the newest, wildest product on the market. Mainly because obviously we're trying to come from a human user based approach, evident. So I think it's very fair to say that designers and engineers have always very much liked to make assumptions, and that is obviously just, I think, a kind of natural instinct as within our kind of positions in the product process. So how can it all go wrong? We've probably seen these things happen. We probably all pick up on them day in, day out when you see new things come out or you interact with things online. Um, here, I think we can see is a very clear element of something going wrong, and this is obviously a pretty garish UX issue we've got going on. But this, I think, is where we start to want to move away from potential, making assumptions of what needs to be there and allowing data to be able to actually be the driving force behind anything we do. So we at Evident do a lot of user testing. I won't go into too much of that today because I think Carly actually did a talk on Wednesday, so everyone can kind of jump over to that and see that. She did a great job. But here I'm just kind of picking out a couple of areas where we have clearly seen that there's been an assumption as to what's been needed here, and I would hazard to say that it's slightly missing the mark. So and we don't just see it in digital products necessarily as well. We see it in hardware, and we've all probably felt the pain from some of these things that have been going around that seem to be, clearly not data driven, because I can't imagine customers ever wanting this sort of functionality, and especially the ones where it comes to kind of adapters and those different things. I think I can't remember how many conversations we've had in the office around the adapters that have to go into the new MacBooks and things like that. So these issues aren't necessarily specifically driven towards just digital product design. They do happen everywhere, and I'm sure everyone on this here today probably has picked them out day in, day out. I mean, another question, I guess, is why is a designer talking about AI? And that is, we've been, like I say before, we've been very fortunate with Evident as a whole, the partners we work with, because we work with quite large products, or quite heavily used products. We have the opportunity to deal with relatively large data sets, and the partners that we work with, we've been really lucky for them to involve us in the process and allow us to introduce different AI features into design, and then obviously work with development teams to be able to really kind of work out how those things can kind of manifest. And I guess I could probably caveat that with this isn't the way we introduce these different kind of AI elements into the products and the designs that we do. It isn't necessarily it's not a thing that happens overnight. It is a very strategic roadmap of being able to bring these things in, and a lot of the products that we bring them into are kind of phase 6, 7, 8 potentially, and so obviously there has to be somewhat of a driving product already in place, at least delivering a human-centered experience, and obviously we're not talking about necessarily the user testing process, but obviously it's something that we do try to sort of champion as much as possible, is that we want to make sure that each of the actual changes or potential enhancements we make to a product are being vetted with real users. So I guess why is a designer talking about AI? I guess for me and for us at Evident, we see AI as a really massive opportunity for us in commercial projects, I guess, and in our actual in our roles ourselves. So we think we can see where potential AI is going to really speed up our process. But also we have the opportunity to really kind of push products forward for our partners and our clients. So it allows us to kind of go that next level up and introduce elements which potentially our partners or our clients might not necessarily have been aware of, or couldn't necessarily kind of string together as a feasible product, and how it would work for them, and what the business case looks like for them. So we, as a whole, we see it as a really massive opportunity. And this was a really nice quote that was that's obviously been put together by Josh Clark, which is AI is our new design material, and I think that's kind of how we've really started to see it. And I think it's a great way to really look at this new emerging technology, is that it is a new design material. It will give us more data. It will shift our kind of roles, and it will give us more. It will be it's like another tool on the tool belt for us, really. And I think at its absolute foundation, it's going to make our products far better and far more usable. So, I think it has a really tangible link to UX and the way that products are actually designed. So, adapting for better experience. I'll go through. What I'm going to do is I'll go through a few different versions of kind of machine learning and AI, which I think kind of I've tried to use examples where they are a little bit more kind of mainstream, I guess, so we can kind of see where things are now actually entering the kind of product market and actually being used quite widespread. And I'm sure some of these will jump out at you and really kind of will really resonate, that you've kind of used them and you see them day in, day out. And you can see, obviously, that shows how this is starting to move into the product design process. So the first one we're going to deal with is recommendation. And I think this is probably one of the most popular formats that we see nowadays. We see it in, a lot of SaaS products, anything that's to do with making choices. So Netflix, Spotify, I won't talk about Amazon Prime, because I don't think everyone agrees that it's a bit of a haggard experience, but everything is there, and it's based on, obviously, based on data being gathered in the background and actually then being pulled together and tagged to different things, so that it's recommending new things to you, which are based on, obviously, your interest already. So this is an example. Obviously, Spotify, I think, is a fantastic example of this, and we probably see this day in, day out. And obviously, this is a feature that made its way into not too long ago, in reality, in the product life cycle. And it, like, the fact that every time we play a song on Spotify, that is driving data back to, obviously, the engine which supports our profiles, and it is then tying up new or unplayed songs, which obviously it thinks would be suited to us. So that's obviously quite a mainstream example, which I think is a really amazing format, and which has been kind of pushed out into a commercial product. The next one is prediction. So again, prediction is something that I think that we all probably deal with day in, day out, and we obviously, over the last, I don't know, year or two, we probably saw it move again more into the kind of more commercialized products that we work with and that we use day in, day out. So yeah, as an explanation, this is, predictions are based on future. It's based on making predictions for the future, based on past and present data, and actually analyzing trends. So that trends element is really important, and we see that. We can see that now in things like Gmail, where it's actually it's dynamically finishing sentences for us. And when this actually first came out, and I use this personally, so I found that initially, obviously, the way that it tried to do prediction was somewhat okay. It was quite simple, quite basic, but now it's started to actually adapt and understand that nearly every email I end with many thanks, and it started to generate that for me, which I think is awesome. And I think it's been a really impressive way in which prediction has moved into a really heavily used product out on the market today. Classification. This is where it starts to feel a little bit complicated. But classification is basically a type of supervised learning. So supervised learning is basically where an engineer has somewhat had his hands in there and has somewhat produced a guideline somewhat for the data to be able to follow. And the way this works is, whether it's based on categories or anything like that, it allows data to be matched and suited to different categories, and to almost be kind of, placed into groups. And the example that I've pulled out today is for Google Forms. It's a video. I mean, this is a really impressive way in which they've obviously brought a kind of user focused design and level of classification in, so that we can see here that this product is actually suggesting the type of responses that need to be provided off the base of someone just free typing a question. And so, whether it's what, how, who, it is starting to understand and to actually kind of push those different kind of categorized classifications into a response for them, which is really cool. And obviously this has massive implications. This could be used in anything really, in huge form-based products, anything that's money supermarket or anything along those lines, anything that has dynamic features or dynamic questions. So there are really widespread use cases for this sort of thing out there now. Generation. So generation is it's where there are two networks that actually compete with each other, and it's called a GAN, or else I always try and say this, and I always mix up the words, but a generative adversarial network. And this is a really impressive way in which obviously this is actually like an unsupervised learning. So this is two networks that actually learn from each other. There is a generator and a discriminator. So the generator allows that it produces scenarios for the discriminator to actually solve. And at the start of when they first start trying to do this process, the generators are producing very, very simple formats of scenarios for the discriminator to react to. And the more and more it does it, the more complicated they get. So here's an example of something like that working. This is very cool. These are free drones, and these are all running off of a GAN network. So the action is actually placed, and then there is a discriminator that's having to react to that. So you can see that they're all somewhat talking to each other to actually kind of almost work together. And I guess more like more like in social media, we've seen GANs be utilized for different applications, and this is an application. This isn't just a picture of my family, but yeah. So there is a we've seen obviously there being a kind of social use for this sort of thing. And this is a very interesting way in which they do this. So if you imagine when you upload a photo, it's mapping against many data sets to be able to provide what potentially or somewhat to predict what that person might look like in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years time, or hopefully not in this case. But so we've seen kind of some of this stuff, this machine learning, things like that, actually enter into sort of somewhat of the mainstream really, and it's captured some interest. So those are some kind of very high level examples, just kind of hopefully gives you a very basic format. I mean, there are some amazing resources out there now where you can learn so much about how AI and machine learning works within user experience and product design, but it will probably be a little bit too deep for me to get into today. So but I guess one of the bigger questions is like, what about me as a designer? So we're an engineer, so we've worked on this for quite a long time at Evident, is kind of looking at how our processes do somewhat mimic a somewhat of a data-driven approach. And so design systems, they're not anything new really, but what we think is we're about to see potentially like a much bigger emphasis be put on design systems, and I think as the reason why I put this example in here and wanted to talk about it is mainly because design systems is it's basically a library, library of components that we design based off of a user experience that we build in kind of wireframe format. And these library systems, like once you build it for a product, it does get updated, but realistically, like it's more of a you maintain these libraries as opposed to kind of tear them down and rebuild them every time. And I think that the way that these components work is that, and this library the library element really does kind of there is a massive synergy between a library and obviously what an AI can do. So we've seen already big companies that run big products really try to harness how that process of building a design system can work down the line, so with alongside of AI. And I think one of the most impressive ways of looking at it is that it takes away a lot of to be honest, designers there is it really isn't a very good use of time for people to be pushing pixels around the screen all the time. A lot of the time it is about managing a much bigger architecture of design, which is what these companies have tried to support. So, the Airbnb, WeWork, and IBM, they all built really tangible design systems, and now they're actually able to spend more time in user testing and more time in UX, in the UX phase, without really having to concern themselves with having to redesign or keep things consistent, because obviously design systems, they should be consistent. So there is an argument that down the line you will be able to potentially speak a set of requirements, and there will be an AI that can piece together the components that's required from a design system. We've seen some really amazing functionality be produced off of this actual use case, really, by a company called Wizard, I think it's called UIZARD, and it's really cool. So you can sketch a wireframe, take a photo of it, and it will basically build it into a wireframe, or like a very, very loose UI, which and all it's doing is basically talking to a sketch library or a kind of a set of components, and pulling together and recognizing which component fits best in that scenario. So we're going to see some really big advances, and that's obviously a design process element, which we think that will be massively sped up by the introduction of AI when it comes to design. And the other thing to think about really is the kind of legwork that gets done within the design process. So we always try to focus as much time as we can in the areas that really do justify having that time. So in the UX phase, obviously the most important thing is to make a product usable for people, but also gathering the data. So the user testing phase, and it's not always super easy to get the time to be able to do those phases. So what we're hoping is that the introduction of AI into hopefully our design process will mean that we'll be able to work way smarter and not harder, and it will all work towards actually just producing a much better product experience for our customers or for our partners. I've dropped in a case study very quickly, and this is something that we've evidently worked on not too long ago. It's called the Beacon Project. It's a government tool, and they came to us, and the premise of the tool was to actually try to help SME businesses by building a sort of a tool which allows them to get support and advice around disability and mental health, and inclusivity and recruitment and things like that. So SMEs notoriously really hard market to work with, and there's a lot of them, and you've got multiple sectors, multiple different business sizes within the SMEs, obviously. So you've got all these different variances that live within this kind of, this solution that the government wanted to produce. So we started working, and we also we did a lot of user testing, did a lot of design sprints around how to produce and what we should be producing. This was all data driven, this whole project. So we were testing it with real businesses and getting feedback and making changes iteratively. And we found that one of the key things that stood out massively was obviously searching, being able to ask a question. One of the things that we noticed is obviously that these searches are always unstructured. When you type into Google, one person is going to ask a question in a certain way, and the next person will be asking in a completely different way. So we needed to produce something that was obviously going to be able to somewhat manage that. And so what we actually identified when we got deeper into the project is that down the line, this tool was hopefully going to expand out to nationwide. So every SME business would be able to access it, and that would give us an opportunity for really big data sets with regards to activity, but also in regards to searches. What are people asking for? So we actually we worked with the DWP and the Cornwall Council. This was piloted in Cornwall. And we worked with them to actually try to identify where this thing could be, and realistically how we could support the design of the product so that it could harness AI down the line. And these are a couple of screenshots of the sort of things we looked at. So we looked at proactively predicting useful information. So that's with a bit of machine learning. We could, off the back of searches, start to understand where people weren't finding the resources they were looking for. They were getting empty searches and they couldn't access things that they were looking for, and that could then feed back to the primary the government department that were going to manage what data and what information sat in this tool. And machine learning and that search element also gave us the ability to serve far more accurate content to users. So if as a user you interacted more with videos or handbooks or articles or anything like that, we'd be able to manipulate the experience so that you could access it much quicker, much faster, and kind of your own kind of tailored experience. So we built the whole thing around being able to introduce that later without really deteriorating any of the experience. And I will very quickly just show the video, which it kind of demonstrates what the UX kind of looked like as we worked through it. So there's no sound to this, so hopefully everyone can kind of see it okay. And so you can see where we used a key up search. So as you type, it starts to change the results. You can tailor your results based on the sector you work in and the size of your business, and the system itself is always trying to redefine to be able to make sure that it's giving you the right information for you specifically. And as you actually interact with the resources and the tools that actually live in the system itself, it's sending data back to the system and telling the system that this was successful. This person actually interacted with this. We can serve this because they searched for this, and it ties everything together. But yeah, and here this is an example of how we try to introduce that without it necessarily deteriorating a phase one experience. So obviously the AI, the machine learning wasn't necessarily going to come in immediately, but we wanted to build something so that the possibility was there for it. I'm just going to jump back to my slides. Sorry. So we had we built this tool. So and hopefully that's just an example of where within the design process, you can start to consider how these things work, and you can start to actually look at building out much later phases and supporting a much bigger roadmap of how this thing can work. And obviously, early on down, like in the design phase, those suggestions of having AI involved. They are somewhat predictions yourself. You are making those predictions, so it's not to say that those requirements won't change. But we always find that it's really, really important, and it's really valuable to explain that to the people we work with and the people who actually run the products that we help design and build. So just to summarize, I personally think that the designer's role is going to change, and I don't think it's going to be for the worse. I think we're going to see it move much closer towards it being what we would deem as being a chief design officer role. Sits alongside the ability to be an architect or an engineer, and so we see that if anything, there's only going to be more emphasis as AI really comes into kind of the design process and also product design as a whole, because the designer has to be the role that actually fully understands how this thing can be applied, but also how the user is interacting with it. And I'll end on this really nice quote again from Josh Clark, which is about, he says our job is to set expectations in channel behavior, which is kind of hits the nail on the head for us, is that, especially the channel behavior element, is that, like going back to the element of trends, there is always a tendency to want to introduce the newest trend, and that isn't always coming from the design side. It's sometimes comes from a client, and that channeling behavior is the most important thing, and that's what obviously a machine won't necessarily always be able to do. And that's set expectations. So that set expectations around the products that we all design are normally meant to sit in the hand of a human. So like there is no one better really to set an expectation than necessarily another human being, and actually being able to deal with the emotive side of what we're trying to create and what we want them to feel isn't necessarily something that a machine's ever going to be able to reproduce. So we think that design role is probably going to shift into somewhat more of a kind of architect element, but it'd be exciting to see how it all kind of unfolds. And that's kind of it for me, to be honest. One thing that I thought I'd mention is that we are about to launch our own resource platform. So we'll be releasing plenty of kind of different processes, and we'll be doing videos and things like that, and also releasing some documentation around how to better implement kind of benchmark product design methods. And if you want to, you can either scan a QR code or you can visit the link, and you can actually you can get early access. So you join the waiting list, and you'll get first dibs in actually getting into the system itself. And that's kind of it. I mean, I was just going to check and see if there are any questions in the Q&A. Hopefully everyone doesn't feel like I've just rattled through all of those things. I can't see any questions in there at the moment. But hopefully everyone enjoyed that presentation. And if anyone does have any questions, obviously you're more than welcome to reach out to us on Twitter or email or anything like that. And we love to have conversations about it. So yeah, hopefully everyone enjoyed it. And by all means, send the questions over after the presentation if you want. Thank you very much, everyone.